Hello everyone, and welcome to Blue Mondays, the GLORIO blog's Eureka 7 recap podcast. I, as always, am your host, Zigg, and I am joined by my lovely compatriots. I have corralled them into this podcast. It is Aqua. Hi, Aqua.
Help, I have been corralled.
Indeed. And G. Hi, G.
I am just here in mourning.
Yep, I thought you might
we lost something beautiful this set of episodes, and we can get there when we get there.
Yes, but yes, you are podcasting under protest. I understand there. This week we are going to be concentrating on episode 29, Keep On Moving, and episode 30, Change of Life. Both, let's say, transitional episodes, shall we? I mean, we are coming off a big arc. We are sort of starting up towards our next big arc here. So these are lower key episodes than we've had in a while because we've kind of had a constant string of like histrionic highlights at this point, you know. So I enjoyed kind of bringing things back to earth a little bit on these two episodes, I would say. How did you feel about them overall, guys?
I think it's a little bit strange. Like, these episodes are very much a two-faced thing. Like, on one hand, we get a return to the like almost filler-like episodes that we haven't seen in quite a while, but just episodes where the crew arrives at a certain location, interacts with certain characters who only really appear in this one episode, and learn something from them. You know, this very classic adventure of the day standard. But then on the other hand, both of these episodes reveal a ton of information that is essential to the plot. Like, they even reveal things that you could argue are plot twists in a certain way, and that makes it very strange. Yeah. Well, it's like they make explicit things that had been implied before, right? Yeah. Or at least characters learn information that is shocking to them. And it's very weird to have that contrast with the slightly more low-key actual events of what is going on.
Yeah, and I think that's functionally the result of these episodes existing at sort of the pivot point of the story, right? As I said, we are sort of lining ourselves up for the next big arc here, and that means we kind of have to unravel some mysteries that have been with the show since the beginning, and it's a little bit of an abrupt gear change, but I think they take some interesting directions on it. Gee, how did you feel about these two episodes as a package?
I do echo and kind of see where Aqua is coming from. I think that, like, yes, that you could see these two episodes as somewhat of a somewhat narratively mechanical transition, right? Like, there's a little bit of a there's a somewhat obvious shifting of gears of switching of the tracks here, right? And I think some of that is just because we've been coming off of Ray and Charles is like probably one of the longer continuous narrative arcs in and Eureka 7, and so,
as I was saying, it's an arc that is very, very, I don't want to say, it's a very emotional arc. You know, the emotions are big, they are operatic, they are very...
Right, and so I think that these two episodes kind of being a come down from that, it can feel, I understandably, it can feel a little jarring, but I think if you remember, like, not that I'm going to say pretend the Ray and Charles arc don't exist, but in some ways, I think these two episodes actually are in some ways just picking up from plot points that were put aside for Ray and Charles, but now that arc has been finished, we are kind of just getting back into them. It's just that we've had some distance from them, right? We are getting back into the mystery of the Nervash, the nature of Eureka herself, Dewey's machinations, right? Like, these are things that have been there since quite early on in the show. They've just all sort of been on the back burner for the last 8 or 9 episodes.
Yeah, and I mean, especially with the Nervash and the LFO stuff, we're picking up stuff that was put down, especially way back in the FAC 51 arc, you know, with episodes 17, 18, that sort of area of stuff there. So like I said, these episodes occupy an interesting space. But yeah, there is some important stuff here, so we should probably start digging in there. Let's start with episode 29, Keep On Moving. Aqua, any guesses on the musical reference for this one?
Well, my guess was this is named after the Five song, but it's probably not that.
That would be incredibly funny, but no, it is not. It is.
I mean, maybe Five for like secretly huge in Japan. I don't know.
I mean, I would believe it. Like, I still can't quite grasp the idea that Alyssa Milano was a teen idol in Japan, but that's a story for another day. No, this is a song by the British musical collective Soul to Soul, who were formed in London in 1988. This song was a big hit. It was a UK number 5 and a US number 11. So it was quite a notable song there. And actually, they released a follow-up single, "Back to Life," which hit number 1 in the UK and number 4 in the US. They have also won 2 Grammy Awards, so they are pretty notable by the standards of the acts who have been referenced so far. You know, they're a musical collective that specialise in club, soul, reggae rock, African beats and stuff like that, you know. So it's an interesting sort of musical history. I'm not going to go all the way into it because they're still going. They started in 1988 and there's just so much history to go into. But they're a very interesting act, and I would encourage anybody who's interested in sort of the Afrobeat genre and stuff to look them up. There.
It's interesting to see this show reference something that isn't electronic dance music or indie rock, because that's usually the territory that the references occupy. And this is a little bit more in the soul R&B music kind of direction. Am I assuming that correctly?
A little bit, but like they were definitely a big club act in the late 80s and early 90s. So that's probably where the sort of relation to a lot of the other acts we've come on here. One particularly funny little reference here. They held a residency in the Fridge nightclub in Brixton, South London in 1988. One of the guests, a very early appearance by NWA. Yes, that NWA.
Okay.
So yes, like I said, fascinating group, extremely esoteric history. Check them out if you like that sort of thing, as they say. But we open this episode with an appearance from somebody who we haven't hung out with for a little while, our favourite military fuckboy, Dominic.
So is it me, or does Dominic look kind of different in this episode? I get the feeling that the animation director for this one kind of yassified him. He looks a bit more chiseled and masculine and mature than he usually does.
A little bit. Everybody looks a bit off in this episode here. They're a little bit spikier. In general, Eureka 7 is a show which keeps very on model. Even when the animation isn't good, generally the character designs remain sharp because Kenichi Yoshida's style is so distinct that you kind of can't slip into anything else. But everybody is a little bit more pointy, a little bit more cartoonish in this episode. I think it's not extreme, but it's definitely there. I don't think it's just Dominic.
Yeah, it just sort of helps. It almost helps me take the character a bit more seriously, by which I don't mean that the character is inherently ridiculous or unlikable. It's just we have been kind of dunking on Dominic for the entire podcast.
I mean, I think this episode dunks on him a fair bit.
Yes,
well,
but it's like it's a bit. You can take him seriously a bit more. Like you can see him.
Sure,
you can see his competence a little bit more because he's not constantly staring at the screen like he's a deer in headlights. At least in my impression.
Yeah, and I think that it helps the fact that he's on his own now, right? He's not playing second fiddle to Dewey or Renton or anybody. He's just sort of, he has agency of his own, which makes him a little bit more of a proactive figure. But you know, this episode is kind of roughly divided between the Dominic stuff and the stuff back on the Gecko, and we start with the Dominic stuff there. One interesting thing about this, they're back in Belforest where our story began.
Mhm.
It's clearly winter because it's snowing, and that would match about the amount of time that would have passed in the real world because the show started airing in April. We are 30 weeks in, so we would have been approaching the winter in Japan at this point there. But we did note in an earlier episode that nobody knows what autumn is, but seasons clearly still exist here because now it's snowing, so question mark?
Yeah.
I don't know if this is meant to be like, I don't know if this is just an inconsistency or it's meant to indicate that the climate goes from summer to winter instantly, but...
Well, that's the thing, right? Lots of people have been making remarks recently that we kind of don't have seasons anymore. We just have hot or cold, like...
Right, I suppose
that might be a reference to that the climate is so messed up that there's only really summer and winter and not spring and autumn anymore. I don't know.
Yes, I think you could even construe it that, like, it may not even have been 6 months. It could easily, I mean, like, we were talking about a world that has been so dramatically altered by, you know, the various factors of the setting that, like, who knows? Maybe maybe it's like August, and or their equivalent of August, and that's just what August looks like now in the world of Eureka 7, right?
Yeah, it's possible. There is some corroborating evidence that it is in fact winter, which I will go into in a moment. But certainly, people do not seem shocked that it's snowing. So whatever's happening, the weather is clearly a little bit all over the shop in this world.
Yes, and anyways, I think the more pertinent detail here, right, is that it seems Belforest is now, like, fully under military occupation, right? That seems...
Yeah, Belforest kind of looks like World War II era Eastern Europe now. I almost expected people to be put on trains at some point.
Like, it's not portrayed as, at least in this episode, it's not portrayed as necessarily malicious. Like, we don't see scenes of, like, soldiers dragging people out of their homes, but I think it should be noted that, like, especially compared to how Belforest was portrayed in the opening episodes, it is clear that the incident, right, Renton breaking out with the Nervash, has in many ways had a very real, tangible effect on Belforest and its citizens.
Yeah, I think the scene which resonates the most is when Dominic rocks up outside Renton's old school, and it seems that all the students have been deputized into, like, military cadets or whatever, or the male students,
something like that,
at least, because they're all, like, marching outside of that school there. But yes, there's a lot of care in these opening shots to show, you know, soldiers around. There's military vehicles on the road. There's a clear air, and as Aqua said, you know, combined with the snow and the ice, there's definitely that Eastern European sort of World War II front vibe about the whole thing. So they don't super draw attention to it, but it's a nice bit of background detail. Another nice bit of background detail, Dominic still can't read a map. I thought that was pretty funny there.
Yes.
Did anybody pause to take a look at this map, by the way?
I kind of
not
wanted
too
to,
closely.
because it looks so detailed.
It is detailed. There are a lot of weird cities marked on it. It is completely alien, by the way. It does not look anything like a recognizable map. But it does say North Atlantic Ocean on it. Not ocean, but that might just be a typo.
Like OSHA as in OSHA violation?
No, I'm afraid not. Just OCEI. But you know, the shape of the continents is completely alien. The names of all the towns and cities and everything is completely fantastical. So I think maybe they put some placeholder text in and nobody noticed. It's hard to say.
It's a little bit weird in that regard, because I did notice that when they show Dominic the issue, when the three girls show Dominic the issue of Rayout they have been reading, the date says 2005, which is obviously the year when the show aired.
Yes.
So they continue... Oh, go ahead.
It does, in fact, say winter 2005. And to preempt you, that was the evidence I was talking about to refer to the fact that it is winter. But also, I'm probably going to say that's an Easter egg rather than anything else.
But it's like the show includes many of these things that makes it sort of ambiguous whether this is supposed to be a distant future version of our world or a different world altogether. And of course,
let's remember
some revelations.
Yen, you know?
Yeah. So they use yen. They speak Japanese, but the people have like English names, but some people have Japanese names. Of course, some revelations later down in this episode will reveal that it's a completely different planet from our Earth. But it does play with that little cultural hodgepodge sort of idea in its world building.
Yeah, and like part of that is just the anthropic principle, though, right? Like you have to. They speak Japanese because, of course, this was a Japanese show made for Japanese people. You know, you at some point you have to hand wave some of that stuff, but it is interesting how the real world sort of leaks in various ways in this setting there. But yeah, Dominic wandering around in a fun little cameo, he bumps into the same three girls who were avoiding Renton in the first episode, who called him gross.
Oh, Renton was a creep.
And creepy. Kimoy.
I mean, there's almost a little bit of like, well, we could get into it later, right? But yes, the point is, at least for this section of the episode, Dominic, in classic fashion, totals his bike and needs to get it fixed, right? Which is what leads him to Axel Thurston. Yes, and I think the big thing in this episode is the reintroduction of Axel on the the big thing on the Dominic side of the plot is a chance to see Axel again, you know, which is fun. He's still extremely grumpy. He still has a hidden heart of gold. He's flying a kite for some reason. I don't know why, but it's a kite made with trapar film, which is fun. So it flies even though there's no apparent wind. And you know, this is a good example of the kind of storytelling that I generally refer to as like Rock'em Sock'em Robot style, which is let's just throw two completely alien characters together and have their personalities bounce off of each other, right? Like the contrast between Dominic and Axel is pretty fun, I think.
I think the episode sort of deliberately wants to highlight the similarities and differences between Renton and Dominic by juxtaposing Dominic with Axel. Like, for example, a good example of this is the scene where Axel is like, give me that wrench. And Dominic is like, yeah, I don't know anything about mechanics. Like, why do you ask me this? And it just shows that Axel is so used to having Renton there who knows everything, who can help him immediately, that he sort of assumes that everyone knows this stuff. Whereas, of course, as we've already discussed, Dominic is a trust fund baby and doesn't know anything about the real world.
Yeah, I think that's the main takeaway I had, which is just that Dominic it kind of reminds us that Dominic has no real grasp of the working world. He's completely useless and clueless because, spoilers, a torque wrench is a real tool and it's like very common. And even somebody who has not a mechanical bone in their body, knows what a torque wrench looks like. So the thing I definitely got was the sort of the incredible sort of unpreparedness Dominic has to be thrust into this more rough working class world, something which is reflected in his astonishing choice of attire, like a silk shirt with a cravat, which
that's just how people dress.
I mean, at least he was smart enough not to wear his uniform, I suppose, but it
works. They believe that he is a member of Gecko State, so...
Yes.
I don't think he introduces himself as a member of Gecko State, right? He just says he's a friend of Renton's, right?
Right. I guess it's only the girls. Yeah.
The girls ask him if he's a member of Gecko State, and I think he dodges the question, but the key thing here, I think, is the contrast between Dominic's sort of very limp-wristed attempt at espionage and Axel's grumpiness, but also his very sincere emotions about, you know, please look after Renton, please continue to be his friend. And it's basically an enormous guilt trip that works on Dominic because he is made of paper and has like the heart of a small child, and he just like flees the town blubbing and screaming about what a bad person he is. It's extremely funny.
Yeah, Dominic having a real "are we the baddies" moment.
Yes, and it turns out, yes, they are, but also there might be some even more bad people because it turns out he's being tailed by some extremely shady-looking dudes, right?
Yeah, I get the feeling that's like, are the townspeople like gonna lynch him? Like, do they know that are these like resistance members, and do they know that he is with the Federation? Are they gonna give him a hard time? Like,
I honestly don't remember, but my read was that they are military intelligence, and like he is,
sure.
who watches the Watchers stuff. I think that Dewey also realizes that Dominic is kind of a useless fool and has put some actual like bad people on his tail to make sure that he doesn't do anything stupid outside of supervision, right?
That's fair. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's there's not really a huge amount more to say about the Dominic side than that.
I mean, I think now that you bring it up, this episode does sort of drive a wedge into Dominic's idolization of Dewey, right? Because at the start of the episode, he gives us a small recap of what is going on. Like he says, like, oh, the planet is dying and people find that the government is inadequate at dealing with it. But Dewey, he's going to fix all of it. Definitely. Absolutely. Right. With his cool special unit. And then at the end of the episode, he sort of starts to doubt that idea. Only slightly.
Yeah, I was going to say, is that what you got from this? Because the thing I got was not necessarily doubt about Dewey, it's doubt about Renton as the enemy, right? Because that's
fair, yeah.
That's always something that, that's something that for a long time now, ever since their team-up episode, that he's had doubts about, right? Because when, at the beginning of that team-up episode, he is very much the I will shoot Renton, the bad guy, and by the end, maybe Renton isn't so bad, and that sort of inspired this visit, as we found out in the recap episode. And I think this is more a kind of, I think it is a more kind of are we the baddies thing than a lack of faith in Dewey, because
that's fair.
Sort of to spin around what you said, like, yes, he recognizes that the world is dying, that the people are revolting, and that's why we need to do the thing that Colonel Dewey is doing, right? I think he still believes in that part of it. I think he still has faith that Dewey is the solution, but he is wavering on the we must hate our enemies and, the Gecko state must be destroyed and all that kind of stuff. That's the bit of his armor which is falling away, I think, and this is sort of, like I said, a follow-up to the Renton Dominic episode that serves to humanize the Gecko state side to Dominic, who is otherwise, a very prim and proper by the books, never looked them in the white of their eyes soldier.
That makes sense. Yeah. So, speaking of Gecko state, I guess Holland is still like in a coma, which explains why there is surprisingly little drama on the Gecko state side of things in this episode.
Look, it has been long established that there must be at least one member of the crew in a coma at all points. Now Eureka has woken up, we have to balance the scales, so now Holland gets to be in a coma for a while.
One last thing then before we move entirely from the Dominic section. I did sort of like the detail, right, that, going back to those three girls, Renton's classmates, right, is, obviously this is an episode focused on, like, Dominic and his interaction with Axel Thurston, and Renton is not on screen or present for this conversation. But I think in many ways this scene also sort of acts as a way to illustrate, like, how much Renton has grown as a person and how much, like, in some ways, how much his life has changed, right? Even though he himself has not returned home, the return home framing, like, helps illustrate the distance Renton has made in the time since he has left his home, right?
It's a return home for the viewer at the very least,
right?
So
they're talking about, like, they don't know exactly, right? But Renton, he's off with Gecko State. Yeah. He's going on cool adventures, right? The three girls who, like, again, thought Renton was a creep loser, like, are now kind of like low key, like,
interested,
interested in him, right? Like, I would not go as far as say have a crush, but they're like, wow, like, you met Renton, like, what's he doing? Like, did you meet Talho? Like, is Renton hanging out with Talho? Right? There's that photo of Talho, yes. Hazing Renton. It's just a photo spread in an issue of
yes.
Ray Out, and it's like,
she's doing the misty ear pull on him. Right?
Yeah, and it's like, I do love that there is that implication that this entire time, right, that the entire span of the show, maybe like even like when Ray and Charles were like storming the Gecko, was Stoner hard at work typing out the next op-ed for Rayout? Was he in the CMS handling the image layout for the next issue?
Hey, information wins the war.
Right. The implication is they've continued to publish issues of Rayout this entire time, right? So.
I mean, I think the implication might be that my read was always that Rayout is like a quarterly publication, and so
probably
it might be way, way behind the curve, because we're seeing stuff that happened in the opening episodes, right? The most recent episode of the most recent issue of Rayout we've seen before this one is the Renton in the tracksuit issue. Right. So I think perhaps Rayout is still stuck in the past, where everything is fun and hijinks, and also we're publishing revolutionary propaganda.
Boy, I can't wait till the spring 2006 issue of Rayout, where they have pictures of Charles's corpse in the hangar of the Gecko.
Yeah, I mean, if you recall, shortly before Charles and Ray invaded, there was in fact a scene with Stoner where he was saying, maybe maybe Rayout has run its course. Maybe we should shut it down and focus on something a little bit more important at this point. So we will see the eventual fate of Rayout there. But yeah, that's probably a good scene to transition over to the things that are happening on the Gecko.
Oh, one more thing.
Go for it.
Shout out to Ozzy the Junkman, R.I.P. Ozzy.
Yep, he is still a fine source of spare parts there. But yes, over on the Gecko, we open with a still fairly novel but refreshing scene, which is Renton and Eureka are hanging out and talking to each other.
Yeah.
And having a very emotionally honest kind of heart-to-heart here.
Well, yeah, it sort of develops into that, right?
Right. It's emotionally honest, but it is not melodramatic. It is just Renton sort of reminiscing in a positive way about the things that Ray and Charles taught him. And I think it's very touching that he can still remember the good things he learned from them, the values they instilled upon him, even though in the last episode he sort of let them be butchered like dogs by the Gecko state.
I mean, I think it's interesting, right? It's because there is a little bit of melodrama here. Renton works himself up into a state of high drama here, but it is a more mature approach, right? He is trying to remember the good sides. Obviously some of the melancholy creeps in. He's wearing Charles's wedding ring on a band around his neck, like a keepsake.
I mean, it is a bit ambiguous, as you say, because it also kind of reflects an almost traumatic response that Renton feels this big need to start cleaning because that is what he did when he was with Ray and Charles. And it still continues the theme that even though Renton has self-actualized to a certain degree, he unfortunately still feels as if he needs to validate his existence and his presence on the Gecko.
I don't necessarily read the cleaning spree as I need to justify my existence on the Gecko as much as it is because there's a line in that conversation, right, where it's I think Renton says something along the lines of I want there to be I want to create a happy enough life with you, Eureka, enough to make up for Ray and Charles, right?
But I do think he explicitly says, I need to make myself useful or something along those lines.
Right, but
I think it does, but... Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I think you're both right to a certain extent, because I don't necessarily think that Renton's and Eureka's cleaning spree is particularly a proof of life thing, I think it's just we need to cope with our feelings by doing something, right? And that's perfectly relatable.
And I think that it's fun and hilarious that they decide to do something really productive, right? Yes. They decide, because Renton talks up, oh man, the swan was so clean, it was so well maintained, and so they decide it's were Ray and Charles maybe ultimately like deranged people, yes, but also they ran a clean ship, and maybe we can implement some of their positive traits to the gecko, right?
Yes.
Like, and so they start cleaning the gecko, and I love that. Like, there's like, who amongst us has not had this happen, right? The collective responsibility thing of you start seeing somebody you know, like, doing something responsible and productive, and you're not just gonna like, you can't just go back into your room and play video games. You're gonna like warily sigh and pick up a mop and join them, right? Like, that's
I mean, it's the kind of cooperative one-upmanship aspect of it, right? Like, I think it's good because it shows the gecko working together as a crew, as a sort of weird surrogate family, which we'll get onto in a second. But sort of to support your side of the argument, Aqua, there is the bit where Talho comes storming in, which, you know, she will do in a second, and Renton starts with the whole kind of like, well, I have to justify why I'm here, and Talho basically says crab it, because she doesn't want to hear that stuff. So I don't think he's completely out of that mindset, but I think the whole we are cleaning up and cooking meals for the crew and everything is a much more productive and kind of like healthy way of coping with your trauma than the I'm going to like lie in my bed and like stare at the wall for 24 hours straight. So I think he's not, he's not quote unquote fixed yet, but he is clearly showing a much healthier way of coping with it. Great line from Hilda here. Renton and Eureka made it, but it's really tasty.
That's sort of a bird out of nowhere. What has Eureka ever done to you, Hilda, to deserve this kind of...
I mean, Eureka has demonstrated she is not traditionally homely in that way, right? Like... but
right. Like, I mean, I'll be real, like, look, actually, this may be you know what? Maybe there is no good answer here. I was like, you have to pick one member of the gecko state to cook a meal for you. Who do you choose? And Eureka's probably not high on that list, nor is like pre-reign Charles Renton. Gidget, so, I could... Gidget, you think so?
I would put Gidget right near the bottom. I don't. Like, I'm picking Hilda.
I was like, I feel like Gidget is sooner. I feel like Gidget is the type to just order a pizza.
Yeah.
Like
she's kind of a slacker. That's her character.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, that was the joke.
Yeah. I mean, but Hilda, absolutely Hilda.
Yeah, it's probably Hilda.
Yeah. But anyway, like the big thing here, and like we've kind of been dancing around the big thing about this episode for a while, but the big thing here is that Talho comes in and goes, I'm tired of the story not going anywhere, allow me to dump all the exposition on you immediately in the most kind of matter-of-fact way possible, and
very strange for this show.
Like... I don't know, I think they kind of make it work, I think I think it
works because it so it reflects Talho's own growing frustration with the status quo.
Yes.
Like it narratively, it's kind of a bomb, but in universe, it feels like Talho wants to drop a bomb, right? It's like she's like, she looks at the state Holland is in, she looks at the state that the gecko is in, and in some ways, like it's actually kind of. I kind of love, like, like how I could get my feelings about this later. In some ways, this is the last great act of Talho that she is like, fuck this. Like, I am dragging the plot forward come hell or high water.
And, it is a very cards on the table moment, and it's intended as that in universe as well, because, she starts with the, because the whole vibe is, we're happy, everybody's working together, it's a fun time, and she just comes in and goes, actually, no, we didn't start this crew to be a family, fuck all this happy family shit, we're here to fight a war, this ship exists to fight a war, she actually says that, and she just kind of wants, as you said, to stop dancing around things. I think that now that Holland is not here to sort of enforce the masquerade, she just wants everything to be out there and direct, so that Renton knows, so that everybody knows the way things are going and can make informed decisions about whether they want to stay or bail, right?
And kind of also to get Holland's ass into gear, right? Because when Holland gets out of his coma, he will realize that, oh crap, I can't just, grumble, nothing for you to worry about, kid, to Renton, because he knows now, like, I need to start dealing with the stuff I swore I would deal with, as opposed to grump about the fact that I'm not the chosen one.
Yeah. And so let's go into these revelations, because they're pretty, I was about to say earth-shattering, but that's probably not the correct term here. So
Scub coral
It's
shattering.
scub coral shattering.
Yes.
There it
So
is.
Talho reveals sort of the two mysteries which have driven the plot up to this point. Namely, what was Adrock doing that, had the military so scared of him and had him hailed as a hero, basically? And secondly, what is Eureka? And the answers to that are Adrock was a scientist who was investigating a theory that the entire planet, which is made of so-called scub coral, is in fact sentient, that it has a consciousness. It is the life stream, basically. And so references to corallians have in fact been a reference to this theorized consciousness of the planet there. And Eureka is part of that consciousness. She is a human corallian. She is a big walking bit of coral, is what she is. And, well, this is certainly a fairly shocking revelation, let's say. Aqua, as somebody who didn't know this was coming, how do you feel about it?
I think the thing is, like, it is obviously shocking to Renton, but also kind of not shocking, as we will later see, because it doesn't really change how he looks at Eureka.
Right.
But it is this kind of reveal that makes you go, oh yeah, sure, that makes sense. Because, we have seen enough of Eureka to know that she is not human in the strict sense of the word. We have also known about corallians, about that they are somewhat a vaguely defined sentient something, that they represent the Earth's or the planet's reactions to whatever the Federation are doing to it.
Right.
So you can sort of put one and one together to know that, well, you've seen enough anime to know that Eureka is like an artificial human or an alien or an ancient being or, something along those lines. So if you just put one and one together, you can sort of infer that, oh yeah, that's what's going on. What I did not see coming is the idea that corallians are a sort of shared consciousness, right? That they are manifestations of the planet's sentience. Like, my idea was always, they're corallians. That name implies that they are aliens or precursor beings, that they are a species of things. Right.
And I will say that there are instances that in the future, where the show will kind of treat them as that. But yes, I will say that the sub work is a little confused here, because it can't quite communicate the idea that corallians are both individual manifestations, but also this kind of collective consciousness of the planet.
Right.
And it's difficult, right?
And it's especially the one line by Talho where she says, "This land, the scub coral." And the word land is just so vague. Like, does it refer to the country they're in, the company, the continent that they live on? Like, it refers to the ground under their feet, like the soil, the thing that the earth is made of. But in that way, it's a very weird thing to say, because they're in the sky. So the word land, when you say this land, that does not immediately make me think of, the material that the ground you're standing on is made of.
And, I haven't had time, but I wanted to go back to the old fan subs to see how they translated that, and perhaps I will at some point. But yes, to clear it up, what they are saying is that this planet, the Earth, not as in the planet Earth, but as in the substance that people are walking and living on and digging and building in, is made of scub coral. That is the name of the material which comprises this planet. And Adrock's theory was that the scub coral is alive, that it is a sentience, basically. And it's a fairly heady idea, even by, high concept mecha show standards. I mean, obviously you knew this was coming because it is a core part of the Eureka 7 mythology, but looking back on the way it's presented, how do you feel about the sort of how they reveal this and how it plugs into our established understanding of the world.
I mean, it's interesting, right? Because obviously, rewatching this now, having now experienced more of the media that inspired Eureka 7, it's funny because now you go, oh, right, yeah, as you said, right, it's a live stream thing, it's a this thing, it's a that thing, right? The scud coral's dying cloud, right? You know, it's
well, it very much plays into the whole animistic idea, right? That everything is alive, that divinity is in everything in nature. That obviously Final Fantasy also uses as the source for the live stream.
Right, yeah, and that obviously dates back to, classic Shinto and Buddhism ideas of nature being in harmony with mankind, right? So the idea is not new, but it's still pretty, like I said, still pretty daring by narrative standards.
Yeah, and I think like it's part and parcel with, we talked about this, I mean, I think very early on the podcast, right, about the like sort of like broader cultural identity of Eureka 7, the era it comes from, right? This sort of early 2000s, like, environmentalist optimism, right? Like, and I think in many ways, like, this plot reveal is very much kind of meant to be in line with that idea, right? This literalization of, like, the planet as a being that we, the human race, like, impugns upon, that we harm with our, like, destructive tendencies, and yeah, so it kind of makes sense then. It's like, yeah, if that is the angle we're going, right, that this is, that this show is going to have that sort of environmentalist bent to it, that, yeah, in line with the Shinto animism, like, cultural, like, undertones, right, that we go to the logical conclusion of that, which is, what if Mother Earth was a cute girl, Renton? like what would you do then? Like,
yes, I mean, like, in some ways we are succumbing to the basic anime tendency of, what if we could embody all of, like, these difficult concepts and, like, struggle to understand nature in a form that we could sell toy figures of?
Yes.
In Eureka 7's case, I think it makes for, and this is one of the reasons why I don't really understand the people who say that the environmental message is preachy, because I think by articulating this in the form of, well, this is a struggle for the future of the planet as an entity, like as a distinct soul, so to speak, makes it very compelling. I think that this is a really clever way to unify the show's environmental messages with its tendency towards classic mecha storytelling. Right now, you are fighting for a cause, for a tangible being, and I should clarify. While they describe this as a theory by Adrock, this is true. It's a mecha show. It's a piece of fiction. Of course, the theory is true. The planet is alive. We have seen that. But it does fundamentally reframe the nature of the conflict, right? Because some other details we learn that as Adrock was investigating, quote unquote, the Great Wall, which we have heard mentioned a few times at this point. There, I think we've seen it once, haven't we?
I can't remember, to be honest.
It's a gigantic storm. That's not a spoiler.
Yes.
We saw it in the episode where they go like higher than the sun, where they hop into like the upper stratosphere. But yes, the Great Wall is a storm, much like the Corallian weather manifestations we have seen. He talks about how, as they tried to investigate the Great Wall, his team were increasingly they just call it adverse effects, but I think it's fairly clear that they were attacked and
died.
Well, we don't know, but came to some harm. And this led the military to decide that the only course of action was to destroy the Corallian, to kill the planet. And so it reframes, like I said, the conflict now as a battle between the Gecko State, a force that follows Adrock's belief that the planet was altruistic and wanted to live in harmony with humanity, against the military, who believe that the Corallian must be destroyed and like the planet can only be tamed through force of arms, basically.
Yeah, that's a good word to use, tame the planet. There's a sort of like imperialist, colonialist vibe to it, this idea that we need to control the planet, and the only way to do so is through domination, so that, progress can continue unimpeded, almost.
Yeah, absolutely. And, now we begin to see some of the sort of vague military plotline stuff, which has been very distant and sort of unconnected to this point, come into sharper focus, because Hap reveals that they've been intercepting communications that, firstly, the army has formed a specific anti-Corellian squad, and we don't need to be geniuses to work out who might be in charge of that, for example. And also that they are developing subsurface weapons, so weapons that can puncture through the crust of the planet and kill the gooey center underneath, basically.
We're going to punch the planet.
Yes. Again, lots of Final Fantasy VII in this for people who need a touchstone there. But so this is basically now an ideological battle, even more so than it was before, right? Holland formed Gecko State to basically carry on Adrock's legacy. He is trying to save the world, basically. And clearly Dewey and his squad are trying to bring the world to heel, preferably through the use of high explosives. And this is kind of a lot to take in, and we haven't even talked too much about the Eureka stuff yet, honestly.
Right. I think one interesting thing that we haven't really mentioned yet in this whole thing is that the Adrock of it all, because it very much seems like both sides are claiming to fight for Adrock's beliefs. Because, so we see at the start of the episode that Adrock has a grave that I'm assuming the Federation built for him. It's a monument. We see Dominic.
We have in fact seen that grave before, if you cast your mind back to the early episodes. Yes.
Yeah, and we see Dominic, honoring Adrock by laying flowers at his grave. But then later in the episode, Axel says that the Federation made up this story of Adrock being the savior of humankind. Because as we learn in this episode, the Federation actually saw Adrock as an enemy, as an ideological opponent, and they do not want to follow him in his footsteps. But they're sort of co-opting him as a savior of mankind for essentially good PR, or maybe even to cover up the fact that they, may have had a hand in his disappearance/death.
Well, I mean, we already know that the army has been covering up the truth about Corellians, right? We know that the military has been actively suppressing the information. I mean, this is something which has been done in real life, which is to take a figure, make them a martyr, and use them to distract from various other things which may be happening, right? Like, Adrock is dead. He is a useful patsy to push forward as an ultimate hero for the people to worship on. And in the meantime, the stuff that he was actually investigating, that can continue in the background where people are less likely to notice it there. So
it is very like Republicans saying, well, MLK dreamt of a world where people are judged by the content of their character and not by the color of their skin coded.
The idea that you are shielding your sins behind a benevolent figure is older than it's as old as the idea of democracy itself, basically. But it's another example of this world being much more complex than we thought, right? Because we know, as the audience, we now know that Adrock really was a hero, that he was somebody who was ultimately trying to fight for the future of humanity by sort of reconciling them with the planet. But by using him as a figure of propaganda, the military has basically both covered up their own complicity and given, as I said, the population somebody to focus on while they get the dirty work done in the background there. So I think that, early on in that original scene at Adrock's grave, we saw that Axel was very bitter and dismissive of his son. And this is why, he knows that Adrock did not die to save the world, or if he did, it's not for the reasons that the military laid out. He knows this is a sham. He knows that the reason for his family's fame and renown is not true at all. And in fact, we see in the next episode that he is perhaps more involved in some of the aspects of this world than we thought there. But I just wanted to make sure that we touch on Eureka briefly before we finish up on this episode, because this is, as you say, we knew she wasn't human. Viewers are not idiots. We knew she wasn't human, but I think that obviously now, we know that she is effectively an avatar of the planet itself. It makes her position as somebody who is sort of unfamiliar with the tropes of humanity much more stark and understandable, right? Like she is here effectively as an envoy, right? An emissary almost.
She almost represents the purity, right? The idea that she has no concept of human conventions is the idea, is sort of reflective of the idea that she is the unspoiled earth, right? That has a difficult that finds it difficult to coexist with humanity's desire for expansion, extermination, control, advancement, and so on and so on.
Right, yes. I think that she also represents the alienness of what they are trying to contact, right? She represents that it is difficult for either side to understand each other in this sort of war, Cold War, whatever you want to call it there. It's tricky, and obviously the nature of Eureka will continue to be an important aspect of the show as
but of
we go
course
forward.
This is anime, so of course she is also human. Like the whole point is that she is not human, but she is capital H human, right? She is capable of love. She is capable of caring for the kids, for her friends, for Renton.
I think it might be better to say that she is not human, but she is a person.
Right. And she is human in that she may not be physically human, but she has the emotional, empathetic traits that we generally refer to when we say that someone is human/inhuman in that metaphorical sense, right?
But she didn't always have those things, right?
Yes,
that's the point. She is learning to become a human. And I think the show is deliberately a little vague about how much she is her own independent person as opposed to an extension of the greater sort of Corellian overmind, for whatever you want to call it, but yes, I mean, like, obviously, anime is not unfamiliar with, cold-hearted girls who gradually learn to love and care and all that kind of thing, but in a certain sense, Eureka's path is more justified than most because she really is here to learn about humanity, right? She really is here to sort of see what humanity is like, and I just think that this reveal, as unsurprising as it might be, it adds quite a lot of fun context and sort of gives her character a bit of a greater depth as well there.
Also very much engaging with the whole nature versus nurture debate, right? Because Eureka represents the planet. It is interesting to see how the show treats her development as a person, like what traits of her are inherent and which of them did she learn or obtain from Renton, from the kids, from living together with the gecko state, and sort of also how that reflects on the planet. Because obviously when you make a message like this about living in harmony with nature, you have to acknowledge as well that primitivism, as in letting nature dominate us and decide how we live, is probably also not the correct solution. So it's interesting to see how Eureka, as an avatar for the planet, and her development as a person sort of mimic the relationship between humanity and the planet itself. If that makes sense.
and I think we will touch upon that relationship between the two factions quite a bit more going forward. G, before we finished up this episode, was there anything you wanted to say on Eureka and like the nature of this reveal?
Not really, I gotta be honest. I feel like you guys have spoken plenty on it. I mean, there are many things I could say about like the ways in which they will explore Eureka's humanity. I think we're in the reveal stages for now. So I don't know. I feel like probably the only somewhat notable thing, at least for me, is just like it is. I guess I do sort of appreciate the dynamic that like Eureka tells Renton, I was gonna tell you, I just like didn't. I was waiting for.
Mhm.
I was waiting for the right time, we just never got around to it. And it's like, it is an aspect of Eureka that, first of all, it makes it very clear to the viewer that like Eureka is very aware that she is like not a human in the traditional sense, right? But also like that in some ways, right, that these two still sort of have their secrets, right? Like not that it was like a scandalous thing she was trying to hide, but that like even at this stage in their relationship where they are being more emotionally honest and vulnerable with each other, there still is an aspect of like there are still things I cannot bring myself or cannot find the right opportunity or context to talk about.
I mean, in that sense, her her nerves, her reluctance is very human in a way. It is a very, and we've seen in the last couple of episodes that she has been concerned about hiding something and telling Renton something, right? Like there have been some hints at that there. So I think that conversely, the fact that she was not honest is in fact kind of endearing.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense, yeah.
But yeah, these big revelations will carry over into the next episode, which, well, let's move on to that right now.
Oh, one more thing. An important update. Eureka has acquired a new hat. We have already had Littlest Cancer Patient hat, Eureka. We have had Flying hat, Eureka. Now we have Cleaning hat, Eureka. She is basically a Team Fortress 2 character.
Yes, it's more kind of like a head, kind of like she's just got it's just like a sheet tied around her head than anything else. But yes, new Eureka action figure with new hat coming soon. Okay, on that note, let's move on. We are going to take a look at episode 30 now, Change of Life. Aqua, any guesses on the musical reference here?
Unfortunately, no. It's once again one of those expressions that is so generic, I don't really associate it with any particular song.
Yeah, no. This one, we're going back to kind of like the underground techno scene here. This is based on a song by the American DJ Jeff Mills called Changes of Life. Mills is also known as the Wizard. He's one of the pioneering names in Detroit techno, part of the techno collective Underground Resistance there. Not a big hit maker, but, one of those foundational figures in electronic music. Bit of a Renaissance man, lots of film and visual art as well there. This song is from his debut album Waveform Transmission, released in 1993. Like I said, the title is Changes of Life, but that's something that's easily lost in translation. But yes, another very important musical figure that is perhaps less well known in the mainstream there. But let's get on to what happens in this episode, because again, it's another pretty packed episode. But I think the way this episode opens is really important, which is Renton saying, "Hey, Eureka, to me, you're just a girl, and I just want to get to know you just like I did before," basically.
And he elaborates on that, at least in narration, by saying, like, look, I don't care what Eureka is. Obviously, I do care in that I want to know more about her. I want to understand her role in all this. I want to get all the details on what Corellians are, what being a Corellian implies. But in the end, Eureka is Eureka. Eureka is a person. Eureka is just a girl, a friend, something more, someone I trust. I don't really... Her nature does not change the way I feel about her.
Yeah, and I think as well, he notes that he kind of would like to run away with her. He wants to run away to live a peaceful life with Eureka, but also, he shows that he's grown in the sense that he realizes that's not practical. He wants to commit to the fight instead, and that's
every mecha anime is ultimately about how you mustn't run away.
Yes, indeed. Speaking of committing to the fight, Talho's really going through it in this episode. You know, I mean, she is having trouble with Holland. She has a bit of a heart-to-heart with Renton here, where I think the key line here is where she says to Renton, "I'm sorry that Holland is someone like this," which is like, yeah, we know Holland is, you know, like it's just kind of like a reflection that even Talho, you know, the person who cares most about Holland, the person who is closest to him in the world, kind of knows he's a dipshit.
You almost get the feeling that Talho is so loyal towards Holland, not really because of Holland the man, but because of the idea, right? The one wise decision he made in his life to abduct Eureka and found Gecko State.
I think that's a little unfair, you know. Like Talho is a fully fledged character of her own, you know. I have no doubt that she loves Holland the person. She has seen sides to him which we the audience have not seen, you know. But she knows he's difficult, right? And she knows that he has a particular problem with Renton, you know, and extremely funny to find out here that actually Diane dumped Holland and he is just taking revenge on Renton by proxy. Basically, he's just a sour ex. That's all he is.
I mean, and it works because even Talho is still not really comfortable with the idea of a Thurston running around on their ship, right? And his blood flowing in Holland's veins.
Yeah, that whole thing is so overblown. Like, it's so melodramatic. It kind of feels like it's parachuted in from a different show there, really. But, you know, I think it's an important acknowledgement that as we begin to move away from supreme asshole Holland, you know, people knew all along that he was a dick. They knew, you know, and I think... Obviously, G, you know, you talked about how young you never forgave Holland, and you're not sure that current you can forgive Holland either. I think it's going to be really interesting because clearly the show knows that they have some ground to make up with Holland, so I'm excited to see how they're going to go about it.
For sure, yeah. Again, like I don't remember every single plot beat of like where they take Holland's character going forward, but again, that is why I am curious coming back here with, like, you know, a completely different person than I was the first time I watched Eureka 7 to see what changes. But
yeah, absolutely. But yeah, we get a more of like I just wanted to point out the way this scene ends, which I think is another great moment for Renton that shows how much he's grown up. You know, which is the way he says, you know, look, I liked my sister a lot, but I'm not her. And you need to stay here because you're the one who can support Holland. You know, it's just a very mature, sort of conscientious thing to say. And that's very different from the Renton of like 10, 15 episodes ago, who was, you know, a very self-centered brat almost. You know, Holland wasn't wrong about that part.
I mean, he Renton from 15 episodes ago would have gotten angry about his sister being framed in any sort of negative content, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Context,
so.
Right?
Yeah, and it's just a good sign again that Renton's character development has stuck and that he is a more mature figure. But the vast majority of this episode is the Gecko arriving at Tresor, this military installation, which is where the Navash was originally built, as it turns out. And as everybody knows with super prototypes, you can only upgrade them at the place they were originally built. It's basically the One Ring of robots. You have to go back to where it was created before you can do anything to it.
Well, you know, as they explain in this episode, right, the nature of the Nirvash, it sort of justified by, like, you know, I mean, look, it is the robot on the cover, right? The Nirvash is special, right? Yes. Like there are things about it that make it one of a kind, right? Yeah. But yeah, it's interesting that yes, this in some ways, like, this is the like more technical mecha like counterpart to like the previous episodes. More like if the previous episode is a transition emotionally and like thematically, this episode is more of the like mechanical transition, I guess is what I would say.
Yeah,
right?
This is definitely the most real robot the show has felt in a while, right?
Right.
I was interested to get your take, G, because obviously, there's a lot of stuff about how the robots work here. Some of the nitty gritty details about how you turn this weird coral frame into a working mecha. How did you find the stuff that they go into here? I think it's pretty interesting, honestly.
Yeah, I have always liked the world building of the I think as they call them here, the archetypes, right? The proto forms born of the scub coral that become the LFOs, right? This is in some ways this is still a continuation of last episode's reveals, right? That that the scub coral is inhabited by a sapient collective being known as the Corallian, and then we follow that up with these humanoid forms come out of it. I wonder, right?
Yeah, they do specifically note that nobody is quite sure why they look like human skeletons, but they decided just to roll with it for now.
But yes, this is kind of the follow up to the FAC 51. Is it 51 or 40?
Yeah, it's 51. It's 51.
Reveal there as well that. I mean, yeah. So the premise here is that they arrive here because we need to give the Nervosh Type 0 a mid-season upgrade. They can only do it at Tresor. I do like the setup here where you see everybody locking and loading because this is still a military base and they expect that they'll need to storm it to take hostages to coerce them.
Laying out his firearms on the table and being all, we're going to storm in there and grab some hostages and force them to do what we want.
Right, and then Holland wakes up long enough to be like, I'll handle the negotiation. They know me. This is, and yeah, and it's I think it's a good setup. I do sort of these days now, perhaps being more aware. I side eye a little bit of the trope being employed here that just. The military scientists at Tresor just do it for the love of the game.
I wanted to bring this up because I was really interested to see what you guys thought about this, because the show itself does seem to not really take a stance, because there is, to a certain extent, the whole, these guys, aren't ideologically opposed to us. They work for the military because it's what they do. But at the same time, we sure do see a lot of them developing weapons and stuff like that.
Look, man, the Manhattan Project was just, they did it for the love of science. They did it for the love of the game. It was apolitical.
It reminds me a lot of a contemporary Bones show, Full Metal Alchemist, which is also army bad, but within the army there are good and noble people who just do what they are told to do.
Right, I guess I don't have an answer to this, but I guess my question was, do you think we are meant to take that at face value? Do you think we are meant to look at this and think, these people are perfectly neutral dudes who just happen to create weapons, but they're not bad people? Or do you think the show is kind of subtly condemning them by showing them as amoral assholes who are causing harm without realizing it?
Or even it's almost played like a joke, right? Because Renton comes in and is oh no, but these guys are huge nerds. And as a huge nerd myself, I can tell you that if you brought me a cool robot, I would still want to work on it, even though it technically belonged to my enemies. And then the joke is that he turns out to be completely correct, even though that is a very gullible way of looking at it.
So the thing I will say, I guess the more charitable, or not charitable necessarily, but the more, I guess, the read that makes it a little more consistent, right, is I think I don't think the show is necessarily condemning nor glorifying the scientists of Tresor as much as it's just establishing that there is a personal connection here, right? The scientists of Tresor know they know Holland, they especially know Eureka, right? There is and so even though the head scientist does call Holland a deserter, he says you got a lot of guts to come here, but
he's not serious about it,
right? There is this idea that this is kind of a favor, right? This is a this is estranged family coming home because they need the car tuned up.
Yes.
And
it's fairly clear. It's fairly clear that they're going to get in trouble for this later if anybody finds out, right?
But there is definitely some like IOU, right? Some lingering
Yes.
leverage, perhaps, that Holland has on them that sort of makes these scientists feel as if they need to help him out, even though it may go against, their better interests or even their principles.
I mean, it's even noted that, like, the head scientist Marita and Holland have bad blood. Like, apparently they had a bust up, but Marita and Holland are never seen as anything less than respectful in the interactions we see in this episode. So whatever that bust up was, they're kind of keeping it below the surface for now.
Right. But yeah, I guess, to get back to like what, you were asking me about the mecha stuff, robots. Right? I mean, it's like, you know me, I love a fictional in-universe documentary, right? And so when they do the short film explaining like the history of like, and in many ways Tresor based in what they've developed, right? Like
there's some good kind of like 1950s informational film coding to this.
Yes,
the peppy voiceover and kind of like the fuzzy film reel image.
Here are the brave soldiers and wise scientists who help you sleep at night.
Yeah, there's some good little style touches there.
Yeah, I think in many ways it's really interesting, and it's also sad in the way that like real robot or mecha anime often can be, that like these scientists discovered something like truly extraordinary, right? They discovered like there's a little bit of like that, like that famous Austin Walker quote about why mecha are compelling, right? That we could have made them look like anything, we made them look like us. Like they found like divergent evolved like humanoid structures in the bedrock of the earth, and they dug
ironically
them out.
Here they couldn't have made them look like anything. They had to look like us, but
or did they, right? Because as we see, right, like with Eureka being the one who like basically invents the concept of the transformation, right? It's like they discover this like wondrous thing in their own earth, in their own soil, and what is the first thing they do? They start slapping armor and pistons onto it, and they start asking, can it hold a gun? It's like wonderful and sad in equal measure, right? Like it's like it's cool though, it's interesting, right? There's the whole like, because and this is also where they reveal that like they found Eureka like in like the same area that they discovered the original Nervash archetype, right? And that
we have a very brief flash of an image which appeared in the original OP, if you remember that, of her kind of cocooned in the ground with kind of capillaries running all out of her, which naturally makes a bit more sense now than before. And we also see kind of like our look at the quote-unquote youngest we've ever seen Eureka, and she's even more inhuman than she was in like the SFO flashbacks. She is completely unemotional. She's mostly robotic in her
making the Nervash T-pose and then turn into a car.
Yes, T-pose for dominance.
Right. We also get the bit here where they also explain, and this is why all the robots surf, is because we read an issue of like maybe if not Ray Out, Proto Ray Out, and we're like, maybe this is the way we can.
Yep, there is a brief clip of a Tresor laboratory bio video in here, where they're ramping over cardboard boxes.
I mean, it's also nice that they go back to, because you mentioned that Axel was playing with the kite in the earlier episode, and this episode, of course, confirms that aside from being a quote-unquote regular mechanic, he also appears to be kind of an authority on trapar waves and navigating or using trapar to move things around, right? Which sort of explains why he was using the kite.
More importantly, in this little movie, we also get the reveal, right? And I think this also like speaks, like really gives you a lot of insight into Axel and the way he behaved at the beginning of the show. Axel himself was once part of this military-industrial complex, right? Mm-hmm. They reveal that he was like one of the head scientists at Tresor Laboratory before like leaving under, for I don't think they get into the exact circumstances other than like maybe he was beefing with some higher ups and he left the military.
Or he may have just retired or like taken an honorable discharge for grieving his son or something.
No, because you've got the timeline mixed up here. Like they do explicitly say he had a falling out with the higher ups. Like,
right, and this is post Adrock's disappearance, of course.
No, because this would be potentially pre-Adrox, because
the implication is fairly strongly that that Axel objected to the military on some ethical grounds,
right,
and left the military.
Sense.
But then they brought him back specifically to work on the Nervash's board. So as G said, this is almost certainly all pre-Adrock disappearance.
Okay,
right, and so I love this detail because it then ties back to like, why is Axel like so resentful of like the ginned up legacy of Adrock that the military has come up with? Why does he have these feelings about the Nervash and his idea and Renton joining the Gecko state? Right, is because in some ways it's generational, right? This is an original sin that has like transcended generations, right? That all three of the Thurston men are in some ways like tethered to the legacy of the Nervash, to the Federation military, right? To like the discovery of the Corallian and the nature of the scub coral.
Yeah.
And
also this means Axel is to a greater or lesser extent complicit in his own son's death.
Yes.
He ultimately worked on the thing which, whether it killed Adrock or took him away or whatever, he feels some responsibility for his own son's passing. And, that's tough on a guy, obviously.
For sure. But yeah, I think like I like a lot of this stuff because I think it actually does tie pretty well to the themes and ideas that like Eureka 7 has already been playing with, right? Like, if we talk about like the environmentalist aspects, right? Then the idea that we literally mine the mechs out of the ground is like, it's sort of a perfect like cherry on top of this metaphor, right?
Yeah, like even the weapons we are using to fight this war against the planet are provided by the planet itself,
exactly.
Right? Like,
yeah,
like we took these, if you want to call them gifts or resources or whatever, and as you say, we made it hold a gun and shoot people. And and it's just like a sort of a return back to sort of the early days of the show where they were doing a lot of compelling world building that was sort of extraneous to the plot but fascinating nevertheless. The talk about how they made the skeletons move by like localized electric charges, and that justifies how you can pilot like a massive coral skeleton and stuff like that. It's all very interesting stuff. That they have a giant 3D printer. In 2005 they have a giant 3D printer.
I forgot about the 3D printer. Yeah, it's actually now low key one of my favorite details about this episode is we just had a giant resin printer here.
Yeah, it's neat, But there's a couple of little details here which are interesting on their own right. They talk about how like when they found the Nervash, it's the only archetype they've ever found that came pre-configured as a two-seater. Right? It obviously has two piloting recesses or whatever, and it's the only one that's ever been like that. Only Eureka can make it work. And also we find out that Eureka does not remember much of this. Like there's a point in the movie where she says, I remember it from this point forward, but that implies that she doesn't remember anything that happened beforehand, and it sort of highlights how alien the early Eureka is, right? She doesn't even have the capacity to remember. There is almost no connection to sort of the character we see today to this very early example of her, right?
Well, also one fun detail, when they show the picture of the team at Trezor, Misha's there.
Yes.
Just and that we are going to meet some more members of the team at Trezor. There's some allusions to quote unquote him who we haven't seen yet. But yes, just reinforcing the idea that actually, everybody involved in this story is connected in one way or the other. A lot of them around this sort of the foundational project led by Adrock that caused all of this. But anyway, we have to get to the really important thing about this episode, which is the death of Talho.
They used that Dignif AI app on Talho.
Look what they did to look what they did to her. Yep. They killed her. They killed her in broad daylight.
Yep. Talho is no more. She is no longer with us.
I can't, I truly, obviously I knew this was coming, right? Because, I've watched the show, but man, it's just, look, just downgrade of the century, of the millennia, oh no, Talho became one of those, reborn again TradCath girls, she's gonna start making TikToks quoting fucking Bible scripture.
She's gonna start churning butter.
Yeah.
I think it really speaks to how much anime has warped our brains in that she is still wearing a skin-tight catsuit with flared pants. We are talking like she's joined the Amish or something.
Okay, right. Yeah, so to give context, right, this Talho goes through the most extreme literalized form of the trope of getting a haircut to signify character development. Right, because I guess it's always this does tie into the conversation that Renton has with Talho at the start here. That you're the only one I think who can really support Holland. She has that conversation with Eureka about how both of them have grown and changed in unexpected ways, and how for Talho she. Misha says Misha says Talho, I think you need to go back to the old you, right? Yes. And this implication that the Talho we have seen up until this point is this has actually been Talho's rebellious phase, that she is intentionally dressing and styling herself the way she has for the duration of the show, and that we are quote unquote going back to the real Talho, right? That actually Talho was a trad matronly figure all along.
I mean, it's a little bit weird, right? Because it seems to imply that Talho sort of followed Holland in his regression. Holland lost his edge, became a slacker who runs around in his boxers all day. And Talho also became a sleazish slacker with messy hair and revealing clothes. And now she has to go back to, the disciplined, go-getter she used to be. And when I originally saw this, I was like, wow, this is pretty sudden. But I think it's also, that's kind of the point. Talho realizes that she and Holland are sort of stuck in a kind of limbo, in a kind of lethargy. Mm-hmm. And there needs to be a shock in order to get their business back in order and do what must be done, right?
In all seriousness, I what I would actually say about this moment and transition is I like thematically what is being told here, right? This idea that Talho is realizing that we need to grow up, we need to become the adults in this situation, or in the sense that they need to rise to the responsibilities of leading Gecko State, right? If we have constantly accused Holland of failing to live up to being the leader of Gecko State, and so in some ways this is Talho. This is shock therapy, right? She's gonna get a dramatic makeover, and that is going to sort of she's the first person Holland sees when he wakes up at the end of this episode, right? Force Holland to take on the responsibilities, right? To grow up, enough of beefing with a kid, enough of pouting that you're not the chosen one, grow up, take the reins of take control of what you started, right? But I think in execution, it's not just that I don't like the redesign, it's that it feels weird to me that I know that anime is a visual medium and that this is a very effective way to visually communicate the thematic transition here. I just spoilers, Holland does not get her makeover. Like Holland stays
Yes.
looking like Holland. And so like this idea that it's Talho needs to clean herself up to become an adult. It's like Talho couldn't just like Talho couldn't just stay looking like Talho and just like mature as a person. Like no, we need to communicate to you, otaku, you feckless, antisocial otaku. That don't worry, Talho is now a proper woman.
Because like obviously a woman who looks and dresses like that can't be a fully realized character. Like,
I like that's my main issue with this, which is like it is very close to she was just dressing like a skank for attention, which is what
I hate
Misha explicitly says like it's time you stop dressing like this.
It's such a tired like old hoary cliche that is so damaging to women. No, totally. I will say that I think that as a character move, it makes complete sense, right? Because
that's
all the way through.
That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. All the way through, we have been talking about how Talho is the more responsible one in the Holland-Talho duo. But I think what this is it's not so much you have to go back to the old you who was kind of, prim and proper and smart and in control. It's you have to go back to the old you who was not running away from your problems, who wanted to take on the world. In that sense, it's like what you said, G. It is a realization. And Aqua, you were saying, that perhaps, she would. You didn't quite believe she was in a slacker phase like Holland. Perhaps she wasn't, but she was part of his posse that was running away from the problem. Right?
And she was very much occasionally using that as an excuse, right? Because even though she was the more responsible, more mature one, she still had very much her bratty moments and sort of wallowed in that, we're just hanging out sort of thing that Holland always uses as an excuse.
Like Talho and Holland's dynamic is actually in some ways very reminiscent of, again, the dynamic of Eureka and Renton start cleaning the gecko and everybody joins, right? Like, if you think of like Talho as she has been up till this point, there is probably like, again, I don't think she's quote unquote faking it, but there's a little bit of like, well, Holland has become this sort of like deadbeat bohemian freedom fighter, so that gives me the clearance to day drink.
Kind of. I mean, they have been enabling each other's bad habits.
Right. And so I think like that's why, again, I think thematically I do like this development. I do like that Talho is like, you know what? I'm dragging Holland out of like this funk he has been in for the last who knows how many years. Like I am done like enabling his behavior. Like I am going to be like a better person. I think self-betterment is a thing that is worth like admiring. I just don't like visually and physically how they represent it.
Yeah, I think they could have represented, like, if you have to change her appearance, just have her tie her hair up or have her have the haircut, Or
like put on a cool jacket or something.
Or honestly, go through with the costume change, but kind of just tone down some of the weird sexist language around it, really, The idea is good. Like, I think her new look is pretty striking. I'm kind of into it, but yeah, it's couched in very tricky terms, right?
It's very in the same vein of like the cultural inspirations behind Ray and Charles, right? That very like 70s, 60s, 70s coded like, not hippie. That's not the right term, but like what's like
disco dancer,
disco vibe,
like,
libertine, perhaps.
No, I was thinking not libertarian.
Yes,
libertine.
You're absolutely right, libertine.
Let's make sure we get it right there. But
yeah, good. A case of good idea, poor execution. I think.
Yes, and
which often happens whenever Talho is the focus. I have noticed.
Yes. Look, is some of this like me being, a critical and analyst of media? Yes. Is some of this also just they ruined her? They destroyed her. Like, downgrade of the century again. Like, I can't let go of that aspect too. I just don't like. I mean, again, I think like, in the world where like it's a new character with that design, like it's fine. But like look, man, this is Talho. Like here from here on out, man. Like
you're just disappointed that she's not as problematic anymore now.
Yes, and like I haven't had a whiff of evil woman in like. Actually, I guess Ray was like a few episodes ago.
Also,
but,
I'm pretty sure a certain evil woman is due to make her return. And
yes,
I will say one of the things that going back to this show has taught me, I am shocked by how little anemone has been in this show such far.
Oh yeah,
and spoiler alert, she will show up more consistently as we head towards the climax. But she is such a big part of my memory of this show. It's kind of shocking to realise she's only been in like 3 or 4 episodes tops out of 30 at this point. Although she showed up for like brief flashes in other parts.
Right.
But, in any case, we do get some compensation because, well, Talho decides to cover up, Eureka decides to enter her slut era. And ditches her littlest cancer patient hat.
So this is the other side of the coin of anime, the anime trope of character changes their outfit to represent character development. Good,
yes.
Brackets complimentary, right? Because it's a subtle thing. It's not a big deal, right?
Yeah.
All she does is like stop wearing the hat, but I love it, right? Like Eureka is becoming more comfortable with who she has become, right?
And I mean, jokes aside, but the hat does make her look. It makes her look like an ill girl. It makes her look
sad. Like
yes.
That's why I call it the littlest cancer patient hat.
And I love that, like she is more confident now. She is like, yes, she's going to have her like uneven buzz cut hair out in the open, right? She has embraced who
her
she
weird
is
scars
in this
and
yes.
Yeah, and I think for all we've, sort of dunked on the Talho stuff, it's a good moment of solidarity between them too, right? Where Eureka comes up to her and says, you've changed and it's fine you've changed and I've changed too, especially when you think back to how Eureka was like, have I changed? Have I not changed? Either way, it's a bad thing. Now she is more self-actualized, she is more confident and even coming back to this place that holds bad memories for her of her time about involved in the military, she hasn't fallen into despair. She's been, look, I am a much better person now, I'm in a much better place, I have Renton to support me, I have the support of everyone here, and so her kind of like buddying up with Talho at the end of this episode, I think is quite a powerful moment. I think that although they don't operate together much, I think the Talho scene is made better by Eureka's presence.
For sure.
I think, I agree. Especially if you know how like antagonistic Talho was towards Eureka at the start of the show, right?
Yes. Anyway, this episode does end with the one constant of Eureka. I should point out as well that in the previous episode, Moondoggy walking into the bathroom and gasping in astonishment technically counts as another important scene to sit in a toilet. But we end with another important Eureka 7 trademark here, a sweet rave party for no reason whatsoever.
Company mandated rave.
This is such a random way to end the episode.
Wah. That's the alarm. It's time for your mandated rave.
Yes.
What I find especially funny is that this wakes Holland up, and Holland hates heavy metal music apparently, and it's like such a boomer thing of like, in the future, what is the music of the future? Right, electronic music. So all the cool people in the future like electronic music, and they hate the old music. What would be the old music in the future? Oh, that will be music with real instruments like rock and roll.
Wait, but this is not, the song they play is not a rock and roll song. It's a techno song. Like
it's like it has like heavy guitars in it as well, or at least some distortion.
It's time for the music snob argument. Of what if a techno song has a guitar? What genre is it now?
But like they throw up the devil horns. I think the idea is that it is supposed to be like headbanging rock music.
I do not trust that a bunch of Japanese dudes in 2005 knew that the devil horns is meant to be explicitly associated with.
Look, we already saw this studio's portrayal of a daytime rave, right? With when Renton met Ray and Charles. All right, I don't think we can trust this crew I mean, again, they have referenced some real legitimate deep cuts in the genre, but I don't think I can trust them on like their definitional terms of these genres.
Yes, and I do think it is incredibly funny that Holland wakes up. He's like, I can't stand this old-fashioned music. Turn it down, kids.
Yep.
I mean, I just like to imagine Holland doing the punk is nothing but death and crime and the rage of a beast rant. Like,
yes. There's a fun little Easter egg here as well. Did anybody notice the book that Talho is reading from?
I did not catch that.
It is Le Oiseau Bleu, the Bluebird, by a certain Maurice Maeterlinck.
Of course.
All right,
yes.
sure.
All right,
Just a fun little goof there.
Also, there's a little thing going on with Maurice, right? Now that you mentioned Maurice Maeterlinck.
Yes. Before we wrap up, I should. Yeah, I mean, like, we've kind of like that. Maurice has kind of had a small but notable kind of like role in a few episodes leading up to this, right? Like he's been. There's actually another one in the first episode of this pair, you know, where he is the only one smart enough to realize actually we should probably leave because they don't want us here at this moment, right? Like, and you know, this is kind of like the most explicit example of that yet, where Eureka is worried that Maurice. She says he's been acting weird. She's worried that he's disappeared. It turns out that he's just hanging out with Stoner and learning how to work the camera and stuff like that.
I mean, is that? I mean, that might still be a legitimate cause for concern.
Yes,
like all the members of Gecko State you want your children to hang out with. I would say the photojournalist ranks at the very bottom.
Oh
are your children hanging out with stoners?
I would let Maurice hang out with Stoner for 1,000,000 hours before I would let him hang out with Moondoggy.
Okay, fine. We're putting the tier list right. I would prefer Maurice hang out with like Matthew over Stoner, but yes, Stoner.
Oh no,
I don't know, man. At least Stoner has a job.
We have to look.
Matthew's at least like cool uncle, all right? Or cool
now we have to assemble the Gecko State tier list and put it into the post. Like,
right? Yes. Like at the top, it's like. I don't know, like Hilda and Kengo,
Misha,
like
Kengo.
You know, maybe Scott and Waz are like towards the middle. I mean, they're still like they're STEM, so like they might teach him some important things about like computers. You know, teach him how to
Jobs is surprisingly supportive in this episode. I will say,
or Jobs, Jobs and Waz.
And then at the bottom we have uselessly about Matthew, Moondoggy, Gidget,
Holland. But yeah, I mean, like, I think, you know, the thing I think they're trying to get across is that, like, Mathieu will forever be a child. Maurice is kind of like reaching the stage in his development where he is less of like the super compliant child who does everything he's told and more kind of like becoming his own person, right? Like
he is the oldest of the three.
Yeah, not that children aren't people, you know, but you know, he is reaching the age where he is able to have opinions and feelings and decide his own actions to a certain extent. Right?
He wants to be more than just a kid.
Yes, and you know that's going to be a challenge for Eureka as these children's mother. You know, she is going to have to learn to interact with somebody who she is, if not in the bad way, but taken for granted for quite some time now, right? So I think kind of like keeping that thing bubbling over the past couple of episodes will be interesting, you know, and it sort of adds more texture to the children. And that's again just a good way of deepening the cast, deepening our attachment to them there.
Yeah.
But
it keeps them relevant for like it gives their the more of a thing to do when it's no longer really appropriate to have them around as like comedy rivals for Renton, right?
Although we do get a little bit of that in this episode where Mater taunts Renton again, and he almost does the comedy eye bug at them. You know, good. But yeah, you know, overall, I would say transitional episodes, but we learn some important stuff. You know, we sort of get the character development which we saw in the previous episode sort of cemented, right? Like we see that these changes are permanent. You know, a moment of silence, please, for the loss of Talho. She will be dearly missed. Okay, that's enough of that. But yeah, any final thoughts before we wrap this up?
I find it very funny on the topic of the kids that Mater doesn't appear to know Eureka's name.
Yes, that is funny.
It's just Corellian Mama's name.
He's like, what, 3 or 4? Like, did you know your mother's name when you were a toddler? I doubt it.
I can't remember.
Yeah, exactly. G, anything you wanted to add?
No, I think we covered most of it here. I think, obviously we have not seen Nervosh's mid-season upgrade yet. They are 3D printing it at the very end of the episode. So again, the classic the best mecha shows are the ones in which characterization drives the mecha, which in turn drive the characterization again, right? And
yes,
so,
indeed, the best mecha shows.
Joke. Yep.
The best mecha shows are the ones about the characters.
So that Nervosh's new form is itself informed by the developments of its pilots, and also I forget if we mentioned it, yes, but there's also the brief scene where the head scientist and Holland are talking, and while they're doing that, it's like, they're not spending their whole time retrofitting the Nervosh. Their day job is developing a bunker buster,
a dirty bomb, a
planet bomb. Like, yes, they are developing a bomb to kill the core of the planet. And Holland is like, I wonder who asked you to develop that. And it's a real no comment situation.
Yes. Lots to. Spoiler, we're going to be here for a few episodes. This is another arc where we're going to be in place for a while. So I think we will see a little bit more of the scientists and get a little bit more insight into the things that are going on here. But yes, I do have to end this episode as well with a programming note, which is several members of this podcast will be unavailable at next recording time. So we are going to take a break. There will be no podcast in 2 weeks' time, so the next episode will be in a month's time, and in that episode we will be covering episodes 31 and 32. But until then, I have to say thank you to Aqua.
Thank you
again, G.
Always glad to be on.
Yeah, and if you're interested, you can subscribe to the podcast on Apple Music, Spotify, Amazon Music, Podbean, Stitcher. Check out on YouTube, of course. Do all the normal things, like, subscribe, leave us comments, tell us why our tier lists are completely wrong, and we'll catch you all later.
As opposed to most mecha anime podcasts, this podcast is about